Moving along now, we are traveling into New Zealand to hear from two speakers at the Victoria University of Wellington, who will discuss the importance of Maori cultural capacities in building inclusive leadership frameworks. Some of you may be familiar with Nan O'Sullivan, who joined us last year for our 24-hour event, Let's Talk Diversity. Nan is the head of the School for the School of Design of Innovation at Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. Her scholarship studies, debates, and demonstrates through process and practice the roles and responsibilities of both design and designers in society. She is joined today by her colleague, David Hakaraia, who is the deputy head of the School of Design Innovation, also at Victoria University of Wellington. Welcome, David. David's research looks at how Maori traditions and narratives can be used to express and develop a contemporary Maori visual language. We're so excited to have you both with us today. Welcome both Nan and David to our program.
Kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora.
Is there a bit of a lag on this?
No, we're able to hear you just perfectly fine, Nan.
Brilliant, thank you. I might just start sharing my screen. Which one, David? That one? Okay, so kia ora rā te whānau whānui, and that is welcome to our global community. Tumuaki, te kura hurahura. I'm the head of the School of Design Innovation. Ko Nan O'Sullivan, toka ingoa. David.
Kia ora te whānau, nera te mihi ki a koutou kua tai mai nei o tēnei rā. Ko rāku mangamanga te maunga, ko I pipiri te moana, ko nā tuki mata whaurua te waka, ko nā pui te iwi, ko ngā te kuta me putukia nā hapu, ko David Hakaraia tuku ingoa, ko David. Kia ora.
Thanks, David. Oh, wasn't that going to move? There we go. I would also like to add today nā mihi o te tautau Māori, mana waitia matariki, happy matariki. So this year, this is a bit slower to move. This year, New Zealand for the first time celebrates matariki, which is the Māori New Year. And we recognise this on the 24th of June with a public holiday. So happy matariki from down under. So today we're going to talk about, move your faces because it's getting in the way of me. Can I do that?
Just close it up.
Okay. So our talk today is called Muri Ki Mua, which is walking backwards into the future. And we want to talk about how we walk leadership, especially leadership in design education. So the principles of equity, cooperation, and self-determination are central to our inclusion of matāuranga Māori within our curriculum. And while, as the head of school, I may be seen to lead a change towards growing our cultural capacity and capabilities, a key component of that success, or the success of this, is the establishment of relationships and understandings to te ao Māori, Māori worldview, matāuranga Māori, knowledge, tikanga Māori, protocols and values, and te reo Māori, and te reo, the language. These relationships and expansions of this knowledge into our curriculum and our ways of being as educators, as kaitiaki, guardians, takes time and whanaungatanga. Authenticity, very authentic connections. Despite historically design placing its faith and legacy in the universal and creating codes and tenets to ensure its homogeneous translation across the globe, many recognise the need to find not another manifesto, but many other pathways to design by, to undertake our journey away from the one narrative of modern man in design education that we offer here at Te Hira na Waka. My question for today is, how do we walk that pathway? Do we follow leaders or do we seek knowledge? Te tiro whakamuri hoki whakamua. We are our future, our present, and our past. New Zealand, like everywhere, has lived and breathed the tenets of the Euro-American Anglo-centric design narrative. Thankfully, the tide is shifting, and in our school, who we are, who we need to be as part of a bicultural nation, and as part of a university that recognises its responsibilities to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, is what we see as critical to the change, not only in narrative, but in our ability to be treaty partners. The role of leadership is to achieve, the role of leadership to achieve this is not defined by a title or power or the volume of your voice. The knowledge needed to be this change isn't mine to integrate or share, it is mine to learn. My leadership in this space is defined by my positionality. As a Pakeha, a white New Zealander, my role is as an enabler for this work to be done. Most importantly, this needs to be done by those who hold the knowledge within their whakapapa, their genealogy, and in ways that they see as appropriate. It's not one of adapting Indigenous knowledge into a Western model, but of holding new spaces for this knowledge to be grown, then shared. This new old knowledge holds many opportunities for leading us towards the inclusion of and the being informed by new ways, new diverse lexicons, mindsets, beliefs, and behaviours. To date, design has been dominated, I'm not sure if that's leadership, by the tenets of the universal. And my aim today is to question what is the use of the universal in the 21st century, and to propose that unlike the 20th century version, where the universal gave us very tangible building blocks and codified ways to comply to one modernist narrative, could the 21st century universal be founded on a set of values to enable our uniquenesses to create the better world we seek? So instead of the discipline building the capacity for leadership and solving the problems of the world and design's influence and impact to be seen, felt and heard, what might we concentrate on building designers' capacity to relearn, rethink and redo design, focusing on the knowledge of the land that they stand on, the ancestors of that land, their beliefs, worldviews and values held by those people who have drawn on that knowledge, wisdom and sustainable practices from the past to conceive solutions in the present for future generations in mind. Thank you, Terry Irwin from the Transition Design. So with no expectation of where it would take me, my first steps towards challenging the dominant paradigm over a decade ago were to look backwards, ka Muri Ki Mua, walking backwards into the future. I did this to understand the roots of my own design education and practice. Both were deeply rooted in the Bauhaus and by default the universal, the language of the modernist. I examined this with little anticipation that by unwrapping these tenets of the heroes we lauded and acknowledged within the colonial dominant histories of design, that I would find myself standing in the same place, but seeing it with a radically differently and recognizing that the answer to my future as a designer, not to my future as a designer, but to our future, the future of design in New Zealand, lay in our past, within the knowledge of our Indigenous peoples, not the past of others across several oceans. But to throw some better light on these claims, I'd like to take a really quick and dirty historic look to unwrap some of the critical moments in design's history. Some I consider were the most harmful and the most short-sighted, but mostly ones that led and design followed to design's preeminent and prolific manifesto, the universal. Despite a good start at the Industrial Revolution and the Great Exhibition, the work of reformists gave visibility to different countries, albeit from a Victorian lens. Owen Jones's Grammar of Ornament was the first signifier to my journey that design had seen, even documented, the wisdom and sophistication of matāuranga Māori, with Jones noting Their eye, accustomed only to look upon nature's harmonies, would readily enter the perception of true balance, both of form and colour. Jones, Semper and Coles had, in an effort to right some wrongs and bring an understanding of good design, tried to establish more egalitarian ways to appreciate, understand beauty as useful and accessible. Long story short, and jumping over a few facts, led to the notions of the universal, and from it sprung the doyans. Next in my version of the story, a number of proclamations, none, in my opinion, more damaging than Lou's, when he described indigeneity as counterproductive to the evolution of modern culture devoid of the primitive. What he said was ignorant, but as troubling was design listened and believed it for over 150 years. A particularly annoying and damaging highlight of these years was the patriarchal model that gave further preeminence and privilege to a select group of 20th century design heroes. This can be chalked up to mistakes made, but let's not see ourselves making them again. While some of the grandfathers of design, the leaders of the universal, sought to define, redefine, modernise, rationalise, simplify, beautify, others did seek to use design for social good. And as we know, the former succeeded and the latter struggled. And I stopped short of saying failed because the fight goes on, with so many designers and design networks making such a difference. And again, redefining design by repositioning design. Networks like Transition Design, DASIS, Cumulus, World Design Organization. Moving forward, and again making a leap for expedience sake, I'd like to consider where we are now. What do, can, should, could concepts of the universal offer design now? What do some of the shifts in design's thinking, mindsets, and actions look like to us here in New Zealand, where we seek to better acknowledge and to be part of a bicultural nation with Indigenous knowledge that is not old knowledge or knowledge relevant to distant, now outmoded times, but it is wisdom that continues to evolve through resistant and resilient practices of its own. We hear again and again of value-added design, design-led value that speaks to market, scale, and profits and measures of impact and success. Building on my own knowledge of matāuranga Māori has led me to believe that values-led design, tikanga-led design, is where the answers lie. Papanek once said that Indigenous understandings and expressions were wholly more expansive than those of the West, and he wasn't wrong. I'd like to hand over to David to explain some of the work he's driving at the school to enable us to move towards values-led design, where we focus on tikanga as part of design thinking, design strategy, mindsets, and importantly, our motivations, what drives us, not who leads us. We are looking to build design education that embeds values like long life learning, care, respect, kindness, guardianship, authenticity, connectivity, and autonomy as its universal. These are sustaining and regenerative values. They may be intangible, immaterial, but whose impact is palpable, and they are the building blocks for the rest of the 21st century. David.
Kia ora tātou. I'm going to be talking to you about some of the values that we embed in Victoria University. But before I start, I just wanted to tautoko Nan in her conversation. She talked about we're value-led, but it also means for me, having a good leader, Nan, means that she gives voice to the Indigenous people, to the minorities, and that there's more than just the Westernized views, and like that's good leadership for me. What I wanted to talk about, as I said, is just some of these values, and I'm going to go through them a little bit. So matāuranga Māori, or knowledge, and then sort of touch on this key whakatamuri, te haere whakamua. I walk backwards into the future with my eyes fixed on the past. And so this is an important sort of quote or whakatauki for Māori. It means that so drawing from the past to inform the present, which will determine our future. It's not about how one individual can obtain knowledge, but about how knowledge can be shared and applied to the advantage of our people and the communities that we live in. So we have a founding document in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and so regards to the treaty obligations and acknowledging the distinctive status of Māori and tangata whenua, so people of the land. Māori cultural practices must be supported and celebrated within the school of design innovation. Through adoption of Māori cultural values, practices, we hope to inspire acceptance and respect for Māori culture, its language, as well as an understanding of what the treaty relationship is between us and Pākehā or European counterparts. So to start, we talked about whakapapa, and it's sort of a whakapapa means a layer upon layer. It means genealogy. So at the start of this talk, I said my pipiha. So it was my genealogy. So it talked about who I'm connected to. It talked about my tribal connections. It talked about my sub-tribe connections, and it also talked about the land that I'm connected to, the mountains, the sea. And so it's about, as I said, relationships and connections. Whakapapa or lineage connects Māori to every aspect of the universe and each other. Whakapapa centers on genealogical knowledge and narratives that tell us about the world and our existence within it. Whakapapa is the key Māori tool whereby the universe is ordered, explained, and understood. So, as I said, when we talk about our genealogy, it connects us to the land itself. The land itself is like our ancestors. And so we want to be able to treat the land so it's there for our future generations. We want to treat it with respect. Mauri, so the core essence of life force. Māori regard all natural resources and environments as one and the same thing. And this is supported by the idea that all animate and inanimate has its own life force. The key to the Māori worldview towards environmental issues is the importance of not altering Māori to the extent that it is no longer recognisable. So the idea that, things like in the environment that we're not treating it or we're not ruining the environment, that we're leaving the environment in a state that, as I said, future generations can live without, anything being polluted. Whakapapa. Sorry. That's it. Kaitiakitanga, guardianship. So conservation and protection. The concept of kaitiakitanga centers on supporting the inherent values of the natural environment and of culture. Important natural resources are protected as taonga, or gifts of treasure, for current and future generations, as I've said. We have a multi-generational obligation to repair and grow the Māori, the life force, vitality, and to cultivate and shared relationships between tangata whenua, the people of the land, and the land itself. So it's the importance of part of what we're teaching our students at the school here is the importance of, I guess, figuring out, when I talked about whakapapa of our genealogical connections, we also want students to think about when a product is made, where that product may come from, the materials that they use, the processes that they use. So it's understanding the whakapapa or the genealogy of the products that they make. Manaakitanga, caring about others, demonstrating support and being responsible for self and others. So the idea is that, treating people with respect and making sure that, it's not just about teaching the skills they'll need to go out into industry, but it's also understanding where they're from and also that sort of connection, that we have synergies between our different cultures, that there are, within the school of design that we have here in New Zealand. It's quite diverse. And it's changing. We're having more Māori, Pacific Island students, more minorities in the school, and so it's respecting their culture in the way that they live and design. The final one is akoranga, learning and teaching, so sharing knowledge with each other. So the idea of the relationship between teacher and student, and senior students and junior students. So we've sort of been talking about this tuakana taina role, and tuakana is, as I said, that outer student, and the idea that they would be teaching the junior students. And so it's not just the lecturers and the teachers doing all the teaching. It's spread across everybody. It's a community, and it's also the students teaching the teachers. So the idea that the students are able to give respectful feedback on the courses, and in that way we're able to develop the courses to best meet the needs of the students.
So yeah, that's kind of the end of the presentation. And again, the tiro whakamuri hoki whakamua, we are our future, our present and our past, and it's certainly how we see our students. So yeah, ka kite anō, I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Nan and David. It's always such a pleasure for you to share your knowledge with us as part of our program. Well, we don't have any questions that have come through the chat as of yet. I did have one question for you to consider, maybe wondering about what are some key steps that institutions, specifically academic institutions, can take as they're looking to incorporate more Indigenous knowledge as part of their curriculum.
Well, for us, it's get more Indigenous into the place, onto the staff, because I think, they will have the answers of what is required. Really, I think you can, as I said, you can only really make the space and hold the space. You can't really dictate what goes on inside it.
It's also embedding Indigenous knowledge into the courses, into the projects themselves. So we're not just learning from a Westernised perspective, that we are learning the knowledge that comes from Aotearoa, New Zealand.
And David, I'm wondering, in your position as kind of a leader and a mentor within the school, what's some advice that you offer to young students who are maybe just starting out as part of their design journey?
That you know, I guess part of it is that they have their own story to tell, you know, and back themselves. I mean, like we have a diverse bunch of students here, so it's getting them to speak about who they are, you know, tell their stories from their perspective, tell their stories from their cultural perspectives. So really embrace their culture.
I'm wondering, in building, you know, this curriculum, have you faced any resistance or any type of, resistance from colleagues or, you know, the institution itself? And how do you go about, that process?
I would say very, very little resilience, well, no resistance from the institute itself, because the university is very supportive of us undertaking this and everyone undertaking it. Resistance early on, perhaps, and I guess from students, most of them were international students who, thought Indigenous should be optional. But I think reticence might be something we still get, and David can talk a little bit to that maybe. Even from staff, not wanting to get it wrong.
Yeah, I think people are a little unsure, and I think a little bit nervous about teaching matāuranga Māori or Māori knowledge, just because they don't have a great deal of understanding about it. But I think it's for us, it's trying to support them, and we're going through that process now. So part of it is mapping all the courses, finding out where staff might implement matāuranga into their courses and where they might need help, whether that's to do with the language or whether that's to do with understanding the values that we embed into the school. So I think it's, I think everybody's wanting to learn, but I think, there are people that are scared that they're going to get it wrong. And it's fairly new within the school, and it is about trying to get more more Māori or Indigenous or Pacifica people into these roles too. But yeah, I think it's a work in progress. But like I said, having someone like Nan, and it is someone like Nan that understands, that's not Māori, but understands the value of Indigenous cultures and the knowledge that we have. Like if we've got people like Nan opening the doors for us, then it makes things a hell of a lot easier. So yeah,
It's really hard to shut the door.
I'm wondering, taking a step back from maybe a larger perspective, do you have, hiring goals or kind of, key processes that you engage in looking to build a more diverse staff as part of the university?
Yeah, we're constantly, it's quite hard in terms of especially looking for Māori or Pacifica staff. Because they're widely required and needed and wanted and valuable in a lot of areas in industry and in academia. So you usually have to, they're like, maybe that's the hen's teeth. And quite rightly, they know their value. So the goal is to just keep hiring. And sometimes you do have to frame the search quite differently to make it attractive. In terms of Māori can be very connected to, as Dave talked, to their land, to their iwi, to their whānau. So sometimes it's not as easy as just employing somebody from another city who's going to come here and work. They might want to work here, but they don't want to live here because that's not where their heart is.
Right.
And so, finding ways to ensure that, we can remunerate and support someone to come and go from here is really important. And we have to keep an open mind to how it is they want to work in this space.
And I'm wondering, since both of you have been at the university and maybe even taking a step back, looking, at the journey you've been through over the course of your careers, have you noticed a change in perspective and kind of where we've been and where we're going in the incorporation of Indigenous knowledge as part of curriculum?
Yeah, totally. Like I was a student here, and when I first came through this university, there was maybe 30 Māori and Pacific students in the whole school, and we all sort of hung out together, eh? So but now there's something like 200 students, Māori Pacific, and it's embedded in the courses. When I was doing courses, a lot of the time lecturers didn't understand my work because they didn't understand my culture. But now, there's a lot more understanding, and there's a lot more. I think there's more staff that are willing to when I say not understand, but willing to
learn from it.
Yeah.
I think David talked about the lifelong learning, and that it's important, that sort of reciprocity between the teacher and the student if we're going to keep giving them those titles. And that when they, in David's situation as a student, when he brings them their work, the teacher's learning from him. So you're asking questions. You're not assessing something. You're asking around, well, how did this? If I've asked for this and you've given me that, tell me how I get there too. And I think that's a big change up for educators to realise they're not the fountain of it all.
I think for sure that give and take between, teacher and student, between mentors and maybe, people who are under them is really important, and maybe hasn't been part of traditional curriculum in years past. I think we're at time now, so I would love to continue this conversation, but as you know, we do move quite quickly as we have 24 hours to get through. Nan and David, I want to thank you both so much for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us today.
Thank you.
Ngā mihi.
Ngā mihi.
Bye.